The heads of state and government of the Economic Community of West African States in Abuja over the weekend, reversing, backtracking, however you want to call it, the sanctions they placed on these military leaderships that facilitated the coups that we've witnessed over the past 2 years and counting in this part of the continent. Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso made their positions known a couple of weeks ago that they are withdrawing the sovereign decision to withdraw from the bloc itself. And now this reversal is supposed to be an olive branch to sort of open or facilitate further negotiations to bring back these countries back into the fold of ECOWAS. Joining us on the program this morning is one who is all too familiar with anything ECOWAS, and of course on this particular matter, he's our go-to expert on this one. Ambassador Welkani is joining us yet again for another conversation on the ECOWAS saga that continues to give us twists and turns. Ambassador, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Good to see you again.
Thank you, and good morning, viewers.
Right, I don't know, I would love to get your quick reaction to this development. Did you see this coming?
Well, we said in July, when the coup occurred and the sanctions were imposed, suspensions imposed on particularly Niger, that first and foremost, those sanctions were wrong. Those sanctions serves no purpose. Those sanctions hurt the poor more than the government. Forget about classification of sanctions. Sanction is sanction, whatever it is. And sanctions are creations of the Western world, which we Africans should not toe the same line, because they were meant particularly during the decolonization process. And so European and American leaders used sanctions to cajole countries into obeying certain things that were not right. Therefore, for ECOWAS within its own fold to apply sanctions on countries because there were changes of government, that was wrong, and we said so in July. Now, 6-7 months after, we can see the end result has been panic measures taken, which were wrong, and today I think reason has overridden emotions.
You think this is a course correction?
Well, it will certainly correct a lot of things, but we shouldn't also expect quick fixes, because the emotions are very deep, and the results of what has happened is already showing that the 3 countries, for instance, that have decided to exit ECOWAS are already beginning to see that they could be better without ECOWAS. And so there are a lot more under the carpet that needs to be done to assuage these feelings, because saying we are sorry, we are reversing ourselves might not be enough.
But I don't think they're saying that they are sorry, but do you think this is a diplomatic way of saying we're sorry?
Saying sorry has many ramifications. When you reverse yourself, absolutely reverses yourself, light is being reconnected to Niger. These economic, financial, and political sanctions are being lifted. Flights are being restored. What else? What a better way of saying sorry?
I mean, the president of the bloc made mention, to clarify, I don't know if that was just to cover up their bruised ego, but he said that it was mainly for humanitarian purpose, so that people would get the message. He said, we're just doing it because the people of Niger are suffering, and of course with the few lifts also of the sanctions from Mali and Burkina Faso and Guinea, I think, yes. So could it be, do you actually believe in that excuse that they give?
Well, we did say here that sanctions hurt the poor more. So essentially, sanctions are targeted, eventually against the poor people, the citizens, ordinary citizens who have nothing to do with what is going on. And therefore, for ECOWAS now to come back and say, we are lifting these sanctions. Let us assume these sanctions lift is now unilateral. If it is unilateral, it means ECOWAS had to go back on its words and review its position. Otherwise, there should have been no reason to say we are lifting the sanctions. But you have seen clearly that these sanctions were not producing the result anticipated. And let us remember here on this program, we did say one time that there was need to engage prominent leaders of this sub-region, people like General Gowan, to intervene in this matter, because ECOWAS has never been challenged as it has been over the last few moments by the coming together of these three countries to say they are forming a confederation, not just leaving ECOWAS, but forming a confederation. It was a big challenge that you would be wondering what the institution would be doing to itself. And eventually, yes, it has to reverse itself over all those decisions, all, which means unilaterally the institution sat down and looked at reason rather than emotion to get to where it is now. Therefore, yes, it's a wise decision, very wise decision, in the interest of the community. But going forward, there may be much more than just the lifting of these sanctions.
Right. But you just mentioned the Sahel Alliance that we discussed last week.
Yes.
Give me a sense of whether moves like that must have forced the hands of ECOWAS to say, listen, we're going to lose them if we don't do something about bringing them back into the bloc, because another alliance within ECOWAS that is not part of ECOWAS is going to challenge the dominance of this regional bloc within the region. So give me a sense of what you think motivated or forced the hand of ECOWAS 7 months down the line to reverse itself.
Oh, sure. The confederation that came about was a big jolt, because never had it been anywhere in Africa, for instance, not just in ECOWAS now, anywhere in Africa, had people come back together to say, look, we can do development differently. And now 3 countries coming together to say, we have a confederation. That is to say, they have one single country. And we can already see a country like Russia coming around to say, okay, now that you are 3 countries, we want to build a nuclear power station to be shared by the 3, which has never happened, never envisaged to ever happen. Today it is happening because these countries came together. Now, surely that prompted ECOWAS to start thinking differently. And believe you me, if you allow this to happen and stay, that would be more or less the dismemberment of ECOWAS. And a country like Nigeria in particular stands to lose enormously. We must remember that there is a gas purchase agreement and gas pipeline project to link Nigeria and Europe. It passes through Niger or through these countries. What happens to that project? A mega project of that nature, which means that project will be on hold, because now you are going to pass through a hostile territory to access your market in Europe. And it is either stopped or renegotiated absolutely, which will be at enormous cost. And we must remember too that these countries took this decision as a sovereign decision to say we are no longer here, we are exiting, we are going, irrespective of the numbers of staff that who may have to lose their jobs, relocate from various institutions of ECOWAS scattered all over West Africa. The enormity of such decisions are too large to just assume that it is okay. So ECOWAS definitely had to go back to the drawing board to say, yes, I think mistakes were made, and therefore has corrected itself. We thank ECOWAS for correcting itself, and we hope this will also be a lesson that tomorrow the panic button must not be pressed.
Perhaps a lesson has been learned about how not to negotiate.
Indeed. I mean, one question I have in all of this is that these military-led countries have not really put a date on when they would go back to, the civilian rule. I mean, we're talking about democracy. And ECOWAS is bending. How does it look, from outside of all of that drama happening? Doesn't it look, a bit like power has fallen, from the hands of this bloc?
Well, it's an interesting question indeed, because now ECOWAS has lost, let me say, use that word, has lost the ace to negotiate. Because you can't compel these presidents to say they must give up power by so date. That is not going to happen anymore. Two, in particular for Niger, the time has run out for ECOWAS to continue to say Bazoum must be restored. You shouldn't even talk about that anymore. Three, the sanctions as they were, as we have said before, have been busted in so many places. Therefore, they were not really working unofficially. We have seen trade between Nigeria and Niger going on as if nothing has happened. The recent incidents in Katsina, where trailers were barred from crossing by the customs, and customs found it very difficult to control the situation, gives you a sense of what really exists between these nations. These are colonial boundaries drawn by the European powers in Berlin in 1806 or thereabout, and therefore have no real sense on the ground for us as African people. Let me give you an example. The Kanuri people as an ethnic entity would have been a very large majority in Nigeria, in Chad, in Niger, or Cameroon, assuming they were together. But because of these colonial boundaries, you find Kanuris are a minority in Nigeria, they are a minority in Niger, they are a minority in Chad, they are a minority in Cameroon. All because boundaries were drawn arbitrarily way back in Europe. Now, as West Africans, we need to rethink some of these things. Perhaps the confederation brought about by these three countries is something that we have to go back to and sit down and begin to work out our own variant of confederation, which will be in the greater interest of West Africa, because today Chad had applied to become a member of ECOWAS some years ago. Morocco had applied to also join ECOWAS. Now, it means something would have been better done differently by bringing these countries outside the ambit of just the usual integration movements, by confederating so that we can really be together. Benin Republic had applied. Surprisingly, Nigeria did nothing about it. To say, see, we are too small to be a viable country per se. Let us join forces and become one. Nigeria's foreign policy, unfortunately, has been not clearly defined in some of these things. The western side of Cameroon had requested, the English-speaking side of Cameroon had requested many years ago, look, we feel better maybe being part of Nigeria than where we are today. These are all challenges that ECOWAS ordinarily should sit and work around for the greater good of this sub-region.
Right. So far, the radio silence from the military leadership across these three nation states is obvious. What do you think is going through their head right now, seeing that ECOWAS is backtracking, they have all the leverage to negotiate, and of course, they will be more than happy to welcome the lifting of sanctions, because it also gives them breathing space, as their citizens were groaning weeks before about the impact of these sanctions?
Well, as for military leaders, I think first and foremost, there was great drama, there was great entertainment, let me say, and great anxiety that definitely must have gone through them when ECOWAS threatened to invade, particularly Niger. However, as a form of a postmortem, we should thank God that never happened. Because were it to happen, I was just wondering, how would an ECOWAS force invade a sovereign country. We are in a scenario where it wasn't like ECOWAS. The ECOWAS experience of 1990s clearly was different, because here you had a country that was the hegemon in West Africa leading a force called ECOWAS into an English-speaking country. And therefore the forces were like, there was similarity of command and doctrine, control, equipment, compatibility, etc. Here, the experience would have been quite a different one. Because if you had large contingent of a Nigerian force, for instance, invading Niger, though we are neighbors physically, but militarily we are far apart. Because the command, control, and doctrine are too different. Equipment are too different. And therefore, you would have seen a lot of confusion on the land, on the ground physically. Language alone, language challenge alone would have meant the entire exercise wouldn't have succeeded. And now, with all those removed, I think the military leaders in these three countries must have sighed a kind of relief to say, okay, perhaps this thing is no longer coming, but they will surely not rest on their oars. The sanctions having been lifted surely will mean a little improvement in the lives of the common people. And all those, like the financial sanctions meant nothing, because you didn't have a central bank that you had control over, or a financial fund somewhere that ECOWAS could exercise necessarily some control. The ECOWAS Development Bank in Lomé didn't have any grip on any of these countries. France is still dictating as the central bank of West Africa.
ECOWAS had France, didn't it, on its side? ECOWAS has France on its side,
well,
as far as these sanctions are concerned.
Yes, but minus managing the central banks of the Francophone countries, there's nothing much you can really do. France, yes, would have been adjusting the knobs away in Paris to say, yes, this country A, country B, you must do this, you must do this, you must do that. And that is the major reason now that even ECOWAS itself has to go back to the drawing board. France needs to be kicked out of this sub-region if we must move forward. I am sure, very sure, these three countries will put this on the agenda for negotiations going forward from here to say, okay, if we must come back, we cannot come back when France is still here. And I know that is going to be a sticky point, negotiating peace, tranquility, and brotherhood in West Africa. We can't rule that out, because you cannot have France and maintain the kind of new acquired independence by these countries. So if ECOWAS was going to be sincere in the negotiations going forward, it means consideration must be put on the table for what will be the role of France in all this. We did say here on this program, if you remove France today, tomorrow morning, ECOWAS shall have a single currency in this sub-region. Because
So you're essentially saying France is not an ally in real sense for ECOWAS going forward.
No.
If something good is supposed to come out of this renegotiation.
Not at all. France should actually be seen to be out of ECOWAS completely, because it has been the problem, and until our leaders in this sub-region come back to assess the situation passionately and ask France to quietly sit by the fence and leave this sub-region alone to develop, I don't think we can move forward. You remember, Guinea, Conakry, at independence, refused to adopt the French francs, CFA, as its national currency, and created its own national currency. Though it was French-speaking or is French-speaking country, it decided single-handedly to say, we will adopt a Guinean franc rather than partake in the CFA franc that was circulating in West Africa. And because of that singular decision, France decided that then President Sékou Touré must go They did remove him from power, killed him for this singular decision. Now the country has, despite all pressures and what have you, maintained its own national currency out of all the Francophone countries as an example of independence. Now the French-speaking countries need to really go back and rethink their independence, because the quality of independence that they so-called enjoy today does not translate to true independence. What we are seeing in Mali, Burkina, and Niger translates now to true independence. And so, if ECOWAS wants progress, this would have been a template to begin to develop a new partnership in this regard. That's, for me, is what ECOWAS must try to adopt and use.
Ambassador, you would agree with me that for the past few years, experts have been seeing the decisions of the bloc as though it was a bit shaky. But then with this decision now, majority of people tend to be, applauding the ECOWAS for this decision. So would you say that this decision has set a precedent for, a new way for ECOWAS to make decisions in future?
Well, let's say it's a window of opportunity. It's a window of opportunity for ECOWAS to look at things differently. We did say here in July last year, at the behest of the coup, that the traditional approach that had always been there since the last 40 or so years must not continue. And we can see today, I think effectively, this has ended. It means we are opening a new vista to say, okay, tomorrow, the assumption now will be, if there was a military coup somewhere in West Africa, no sanctions will be imposed.
Isn't that counterproductive?
Well,
because it's as if you're reinforcing bad behavior.
No.
Because I think there is some sort of consensus that military in its best form is not better than a democracy. So if ECOWAS, sets this precedence now by, cajoling, by kowtowing to the, military leadership, making sure that, they don't go away, isn't this going to set a bad precedence going forward?
Well, interestingly, no. Interestingly, no. Because of the fact that the essence or reasons for military coups are bad democratic practice. So, the real thing should be ECOWAS needs to check bad governance as the real reasons for military coups in the first place. Which means, if there was good governance, there would even be no talk of military rule at all. But where you have leaders ascending power through the back door, or retaining power beyond the constitutional tenure, and expect that things should remain normal, I think that's where the nexus of this problem is. Therefore, it is better to address those things than to wait and become reactive to things when it has gone bad. The current situation in Senegal, where you are seeing an emergence of a monarchical dynasty building up around Macky Sall, is bad.
He has agreed to step down eventually.
Well,
so.
Bad enough, because after so much pressure, you finally said, okay, you might consider, not agreed, consider to step down.
In April.
Good. Consider. Let us watch and see what happens in April, and then see the dislocation already created. The timing for elections had been disrupted. Formation of political parties, freedoms and what have you have been so disrupted. So you have difficulties already on the ground, and such pressures are now necessary going forward rather than to wait until military coups occur.
Ambassador, let me press on what Abdullahi has said earlier. He pointed at the fact that these military, ruled juntas could actually use this as, okay, I have to, continue. And then if a lot of sanctions are not being used on them, then they'll get a pass. So typically, let's use the example of Sudan. It came like that, with people saying, okay, yes, the government was bad, and so it was okay for them to have a military coup there. But then after a while, there is that love for power. So right now that this three or about 4 countries that have been led by military do not have any decision. They have not made any agreement, of saying this is what is going to happen. So is there no fear of them holding on to power for the longest time?
You see, that may not be necessarily the scenario. Where give and take comes into play, there definitely will be fruits that need to be harvested. And now the military, yes, are in power today, but with good negotiations and good reasons too, interventions by well-meaning leaders that are deeply respected, some of these things might be obviated. And these new leaders in the 3 countries in particular definitely would want to go back and leave this power one day. But to give them like months to say you must restore democracy, that might not also be feasible, because the reasons why they came into office in the first place needs to be corrected. And some of it are largely, like we said, bad governance.
There was a point when Niger were ready to give that. I think they were giving about 3 years transitional period, but then the ECOWAS was against it. Would it be hard to go back to that? Is it possible?
3 years transition period is usually like the standard practice. However, we have seen over the years that towards the end of the 3 years allocated, there could be a revision of timetables for elections. And so you might find yourself in an unending 3-year tenure or transition period. Or
perhaps we end up with a CC-like type of election where the military leaders could just transition into civilian rule.
Obviously, right. Obviously, because once people get into power, yes, it's very difficult to push them out. That is why it is better not to allow. It is better not to allow the military ever have a reason to come in. And the best would have been good elections, good governance. Nigeria, for instance, if you take 24 years of democracy, what are we celebrating? That's the question. 24 years of democracy, unbroken.
You're surely not saying it's ripe for a military intervention.
No, not necessarily calling for one.
Right.
Not necessarily calling for one, but it's a challenge to the politicians. Right. Politicians need to look at governance from another perspective. If what is meant to come to power is to change the lives of people positively, then let us begin to see the dividends of democracy. It's not singing dividends of democracy without whatever it is. Infrastructure, social development, political enhancement, and the rest of them, respect of the rule of law, and the institutions of democracy that have been created. Can we respect these institutions? Can they have the independence which they call their names? Without this, yes, you prepare grounds for military interventions, right, inevitably.
And just to circle back to the question around the radio silence from the military juntas, they've restated their commitment, no going back on ECOWAS withdrawal. Do you think this is good enough for them to give an answer to ECOWAS? And how soon do you think we can hear from them? It's already been 48 hours and counting. They've made their threats. They're making good on those threats by, officially sending letters to the ECOWAS Commission saying we're withdrawing. Gianni gave an interview last week saying, listen, there's no going back. They've done their worst. People are weathering the storm. They've closed their borders, the airspace and things like that. On the side of ECOWAS, this is a normalization now. We're going back to the table. It's like a divorce. I mean, the husband could want the wife back.
I can't believe Abdul actually went that way.
But, we don't know if the wife wants to come back. So, what is your reading of the situation?
Well, I think it's a melodrama that's going to...
He painted it in a melodrama.
Right.
It's a melodrama that's going to ensue. Believe you me, the military are not going to just take it like that. That's the three countries. They are not going to take it lying low, kind of. And then we must appreciate the fact that they are enjoying a euphoria.
Now they've been quoted.
Yes, they are enjoying a euphoria. We said it was wrong. ECOWAS has finally come to its senses and accepted that, yes, it was wrong. And unilaterally, let me use the word again, unilaterally had removed the sanctions. Now, these sanctions were not removed as a result of them pleading or begging. They said, to hell with you, we are gone. You can do your worst, because your worst we have outlived your worst position. Therefore, now, if you are coming to negotiate with such a person, you are coming from a very weak position.
Cap in hand.
Very, very, very cap in hand. Now, don't forget, here on this program, we did say, should Guinea also align itself with the Sahel states, you will have more problems. And if not by a whisker, Senegal might escape a similar situation, hoping that, yes, Macky Sall truly and sincerely by April demonstrates that, yes, he is truly going, and then new elections can come up and what have you. The situation in Cote d'Ivoire, Togo, are not looking too good. So there are still a lot of issues, and some of these countries, therefore, are also giving tacit support to the Sahel states. Therefore, I expect ECOWAS to do much more of covert diplomacy at this stage without speaking. There should be no public statements on issues, steps, expectations, challenges, etc., etc. Go behind the scene quietly, behind almost everyone, and negotiate some of these things quietly with these military guys.
Have we ceased negotiations following the announcement of these three nation states to withdraw, or do you think the line of communication is still open?
Well, it has remained opened because here, remember, we made a clarion call that ECOWAS should engage people like General Gowon, who has the wherewithal as the only surviving founding father of ECOWAS to talk to these young boys who are literally his grandchildren.
It could be a soft spot,
Yes.
I mean, he made the plea last week when he visited the president.
I think the plea is what we are seeing. First, you remember the report was he refused to. And then some hours later, he was at the State House in a closed-door meeting. Okay, we don't know what must have happened, but what is presently now in the public domain must have been part of those things. That's why I'm calling for more of covert diplomacy, so that contact with these military governments in these three states can be done behind the scene. You don't need to say, we are doing this, we are doing that, or this must be, or this must be. No, not at all. ECOWAS must drop also this idea of restoring Bazoum by any means. It is going to, I mean, it's a vote of no confidence on the government, a sitting government in a sovereign state, to continue to say Bazoum must be restored to power. You are not making matters.
They have to accept that as a reality now.
Simple.
Doesn't that go against the whole principle of entrenching democracy in the region?
No, democracy can still come. Democracy is not a person. Democracy is a process. Democracy is for all, not for one person. So if one person perhaps had found disfavor with the system, he should be removed, and so be removed. I mean, you cannot continue to insist on whipping up a dead horse. I think that's what is really happening. Now, anytime ECOWAS says Bazoum must be restored to power, truly, it irritates the government that is sitting. And that government is exercising sovereignty. So it tells them to take any step and all steps necessary to restore their authority, show it, and enjoy it. That is why you are seeing what we are seeing now. So if the government, if ECOWAS can mellow down on some of these pronouncements, I think the better for negotiations. There are still good leaders within the sub-region that might be willing, ready, and capable of going to meet these gentlemen and negotiate out a process that could be beneficial for all in West Africa.
Quietly, then.
Yes, quiet, very, very quiet diplomacy. That's what is really required. That when you continue to recognize someone from the ousted government coming to attend ECOWAS meetings, that's an anathema itself. If you continue to insist Bazoum must be restored to power, that's an anathema. Releasing Bazoum to enjoy his freedom, yes, that is one thing that can be negotiated with the government, provided you arrange for an exile that will have meaning. That can create an opportunity for all to come around the table, and one day we could hear that, yes, the military junta in these three countries have accepted to come back to ECOWAS. But let us not expect too early, because accepting too early means they may also have signed their exit timetables, which is not going to come easy. Because now, having entrenched themselves into power, I tell you, is going to take a lot of diplomacy, a lot of diplomacy to see them accepting to relinquish this same power easily.
Indeed. All right, Ambassador, let's move away a bit from, what's happening between the ECOWAS and the military-ruled countries. You made mention of good governance. So let's take a look at, the picture of the state of the nation of Nigeria currently. I mean, the NLC already are moving forward with their plans for protest, calling it peaceful, of course, and that's the aim from the NLC. And Nigerians, every day there's a cry, of hardship happening in the country. So in your own take of all of this happening, and of course, your constant calling of good governance, what do you think should be done at this point?
Well, I think it just to restate the call for good governance once more. Good governance is at the root of all this. I did say some moments ago that 24 years of democracy, people are still crying for dividends of democracy. 24 solid years unbroken of democratic rule. Citizens are finding it increasingly difficult to live a normal life. Something definitely must be wrong. And what is wrong? Economically, we have not shown that democracy can solve our problem. Not the variant of democracy we practice today. It means something is structurally wrong, which needs an adjustment. Leadership needs to listen to the yearnings of the people. If the essence of leadership is to further and enhance the living standards and quality of life of citizens, promote businesses for development, that means what is happening today is contrary to the general expectations of citizens. People who queued up in the ranks to vote a new government have suddenly found that after all, it doesn't work. The democracy doesn't just work. It doesn't translate into good living. Transport costs are high. Living standards are exceptionally unaffordable. Food prices have become something that Nigeria, as an agrarian country, is discussing food security challenges. I mean, it's unheard of. Now, if, for instance, government also goes to take like panic measures to say, release grains from the strategic grain reserve to crash down prices of food, that means government finally is listening. Government finally accepts that there is a problem. But you can see the response is not commensurate with the nature of the problem. Releasing grains from the strategic grain reserve does not solve that problem. Because for how long are you going to sustain the release of grains from the strategic grain reserve to actually ameliorate the rising prices of food?
Right. And on this particular note, a lot of people have been talking about opening the borders to allow more goods coming, especially food commodities, so that we can augment the scarcity within the markets, which will address the pricing significantly. Waiting to see what the government does about that. But if you could just circle back to the ECOWAS conversation around what the military leadership in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso are going to do right now. The no-fly zone has meant that flights from Nigeria, for instance, that are Europe-bound would have to circle around, and that means longer, routes now going forward. Now, on the part of ECOWAS, it has lifted the no-fly zone, but we've not heard from the other side about how soon their own no-fly zones would be taken down. What do you think is the amount of latitude that can be expected? I mean, almost like a quid pro quo, that even if they don't say, they might not necessarily act upon it with the aggression that you would anticipate they would act on if they see a commercial flight, leaving Nigeria and then flying over the airspace of Nigeria, for instance? Or is this something that would take time before they would, make an announcement?
Well, certainly, you could do that with a vehicle on the ground, but not with a plane in the air, right? No-fly zone restrictions must be properly lifted, agreed to be lifted by ICAO standards. Otherwise, nobody will attempt to do whatsoever, because if it happens, who do you blame? Therefore, the governments of these three countries...
What happens if a plane gets taken down?
Yes, in the event something happens, like government of Niger or even Burkina Faso says, okay, we will enforce the no-fly zone, ECOWAS must have lifted its own, particularly Nigeria. But it's a bilateral thing. It's a BASA agreement. It has to be through a process. And the Yamoussoukro protocol, for instance, on open skies and the rest of them, there are a lot of details there that needs to be worked out. So that's why we said when these sanctions were imposed, there were panic measures because they didn't take note of the due protocols or treaties, agreements that were signed. You wake up one morning and say you are imposing no-fly zone. A country like Niger is bigger than Nigeria land space-wise. Imposing no-fly zone on such a territory means so much in technology, skills, etc. And when it is a military government that is in place, it becomes even much more difficult for you to do some of those things. So now, let us not expect too many wins over a very short period of time. I think it's going to take some time for some of these things to be worked out. That's why we are advocating for a quiet diplomacy behind the scene. We will achieve a lot of results if we do that, engaging sound leaders in the sub-region to see to these events and say, okay, you can see even the almighty ECOWAS has finally spoken.
Okay, so a step in the right direction in your view.
Yes.
And you see, if you have to weigh it, if you have to put a percentage on it, what are the chances that Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso will come back to ECOWAS? I mean, they have officially never left. They've only given a 1-year notice before it's formally. I mean, you shake your head, but according to the ECOWAS treaty, it takes 1 year before you can fully depart.
No.
You have to announce. Okay, at least that's what the treaty says.
Yes.
I know for the other countries, for the 3 countries, they think they have left. But as far as ECOWAS is concerned, that 1-year notice is still in place.
No, well, you know.
But what are the chances?
Ambassador doesn't seem to agree.
What are the chances? What are the chances that they will agree to come back?
Well, let's first correct the notion that 1-year requirement was when they were members of ECOWAS. When you suspended them, you imposed sanctions, and they said, okay, as a response, we have left. Don't forget, here on this program, we analyze that communique which they issued. They say with immediate effect.
But we know that that's not how it's done.
Well, it was
a process.
It was not also proper to impose sanctions without certain situations. So they were responding to what happened. Now, particularly responding to your when can they come back?
Or if they will come back.
That is it. I think that is the key word there that we need to analyze. If, because now, yes, ECOWAS has set the stage to say, gentlemen, you know, as a family, yes, we might disagree. But it doesn't mean we are fighting. This is what the chairman of ECOWAS himself, the president of Nigeria, Bola Tinubu, said. We are not enemies, quoting his words, right? We are not enemies. I think that's an olive branch to these leaders. But taking this olive branch to them in person and translating it into action requires much more.
From the ECOWAS?
Yes, from the ECOWAS. It has to follow up with a lot of other things. There must be some incentives. There must be some assurances. If we come back, is France also coming back? These are some of the things that you are definitely going to see in the negotiations.
So it's going to be conditioned.
They will surely be conditionalities, no doubt about it. These gentlemen are not going to say they will sit again with France across the table. It's not going to work. Don't forget, Russia is in the wings within this sub-region, whether we like it or not.
Like a vulture, obviously.
Well, I think more like a friendly bird than a vulture, because Russia has never wanted anything here.
Yeah.
Not at all. The uranium that France deeply needs, Russia has excess of it at home.
But Ambassador, it could be considered a vulture move, considering, you know, the united we stand and divided we fall, waiting for a divide to happen before they reach out to one part. It looks like
opportunistic.
No, the history of Russia had always been that right before even 1960s or thereabout, when this continent was battling for independence from the European colonial powers. Russia has never colonized a country. No. They have never demanded for anything. In fact, Russia has literally everything. And Russia has shown clearly, demonstrable, that it is more like a friend than a foe.
Then Russia should reach out to the West African bloc than just one.
A lot more will be happening and unfolding in the weeks to come. So we'll definitely keep tabs on that.
Thank you so much, Ambassador
Haruna, for the analysis. I really appreciate your take on this.
Indeed. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right, and with that, of course, we take a quick break. And when we come back, it will be time to look at the front pages of the national dailies this morning. So stay with us.
Welcome back to the program. You're watching Daybreak on Trust TV. Time to bring you up to speed with the stories making the headlines across some select national dailies this morning. And as always, we'd like to kick things off with a look at the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper for today. This is what it looks like. And the big story is about the back and forth, the controversy, the scandal, the drama that trailed those leaked documents talking about the Nigeria Business Forum in Qatar. And now the government of Qatar is backtracking, says that it will host the Nigeria Business Forum. So there's a lot of people online who were, having a go at the Tinubu administration, saying that, why go to a country that you're not welcome, because they obviously do not want to have those, events anymore. But apparently there's a quick turnaround, and the event is going to hold this week as earlier scheduled. More on that on page 4. Nigerians, northern senators welcome ECOWAS lifting of sanctions. Hardship, NLC mobilizes for protest despite federal government's warning. Gaza truce talks resume in Doha as the bombings continue in northern Gaza, or the assault continues in northern Gaza. In the picture there, you have some residents of Lagos trooping to the Nigeria Customs Service sales point for the rice palliative, which are being sold at a fixed price of 10,000 naira per 25 kilogram of rice. We also did have some reports of people stampeding and some persons losing their lives. But in those pictures, you can see Nigerians, and kudos to the Nigeria Customs. This is phase one of the food auction, and I believe they say they're going to go across the country. I think Kano is next, so let's see how that one goes. Below that picture, Nigeria reaping the benefits of reforms. These are some of the statistics from the Information and Orientation Ministry. And it says that 3.4% year-on-year GDP growth. Not much of that translates to Nigerians living better lives, but also 66% of importation going up in the fourth quarter of last year, and a 50% drop in petrol importation. 100,000, it says at the Nigeria Stock Exchange, ASI crossing 100,000 mark. What does that even mean for Nigerians at this point in time? But it's safe to say that they're sharing the metrics that suggest that Nigeria is moving in the right direction. And finally, builders seek alternatives as cement price soars. Guess what? I'm not going into any house that doesn't have cement in it. If you're using any alternative that is not cement, well, listen, no, not for me. Except if it's a wooden house, and we all know wooden houses cannot survive it here in Nigeria. But these are some of the stories. I think they're just protesting the fact that the price of cement is really at a disturbing rate right now. More on that on page 28.
All right, moving on. NLC protests. The presidency and police issue fresh warnings as 65 groups pull out, saying don't disrupt commercial activities, vehicular movements. Lagos CP tells protesters. Protests illegal, say the presidency, the CSOs, NLC alleges the government's plot to disrupt demonstration. I mean, there is that, alleged expectations from the NLC there. You find that on page 2. Below that, we have the BDC operators, plan mergers and fault mandatory deposit. Port terminal operator, clerk worker arrested over 1,044.29 kg of cocaine. Food smuggling, the customs still man saying that 1,500 illegal routes with drones. Or should I say above the Punch headline there, it says Forex crisis threatens modular refineries and 25 billion naira daily crude input. The 50th anniversary of Punch photo exhibition begins Wednesday, and governors and Elumelu Dangote make Tinubu's economic advisory panel. Now, these are some of the stories that you'd find on the Punch today.
All right, quickly, let's take a look at the front page of the This Day newspaper for today. It looks like the Ministry of Information and Orientation really wants to get that information out there about the statistics. Outcomes as WTO, the World Trade Organization, MC13 begins today in the UAE. Nationwide protest. Falana writes, federal government says NLC not in contempt of court. Insist Nigerians don't require permit to demonstrate in public interest or public interest matters. NLC accuses government of planning mayhem against workers. And the big story on the front page of the This Day newspaper alongside that protest is economic reforms. Tinubu begins broad consultations. Shouldn't the consultations come before the reforms kick in? No, putting the cart before the horse. Set up tripartite advisory committee, meets private sector leaders and governors. Once again, those information from the Ministry of Information and National Orientation, driving home the renewed hope agenda, especially in light of the current economic climate in the country.
And I cannot wait to get, our reviewers' take on this repetition of all of this in major.
Well, let's bring him in then.
Yeah, well, so this morning, as usual, every Monday we have Suleiman Obagaya, the CEO, Sky Limit Media Group editor and former deputy president of Nigerian Guild of Editors, here joining us to, review the front pages of the.
I always have an issue when Sumaya introduces you.
I just had to say
the way
it.
She says Ubagaya is just so offensive to me.
But
clearly you're not offended. You see? You're making it worse. Earlier she called Dangote Dangote.
Dangote.
So
Is that we have to go back to the house of pronunciation and do it right. Good morning, and thank you for joining us. It's
Good morning.
to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. Good
All right,
morning.
let's start by another thing that has been echoing in Nigeria. That's the Qatar backtracks on host Nigeria's business forum. What is your take on all of this drama? There's been a lot when it comes to this administration's, bilateral agreements with other countries where you would so something would be announced and then later on these countries would backtrack and say, no, this never happened before.
Yeah.
So it has been bringing this sort of mistrust between Nigerians and the administration. And now there is another controversy now.
Okay, talking particularly about Qatar, what it underscores is the disdain with which a lot of countries of the world hold this administration of Bola Ahmed Tinubu, or if you want to put it in another way, hold Nigeria at the moment. They know that Nigeria is the biggest economy in Africa. They know we have the biggest market in terms of population. Yet, they are even reluctant to hold a business forum with the president of Nigeria and leading businessmen that are going to be in his tour during the visit. You see, whereas, of course, we can quickly accuse them of snubbing us or snubbing our government, there is also the issue of, there are certain realities we need to look at. Why is it that countries of the world are no longer too interested in holding this kind of forums with us? The reality is they know that even if the forums hold back in Nigeria, if they invest in Nigeria, there are major issues they have to contend with. And these are issues that have been in the fore for quite long. Issues like multiple taxation, issues like ease of doing business. These are very major issues. Issues also of issues to do with repatriation of the proceeds of the gain they are going to make when they invest in Nigeria. They know very much that their neighboring country, Dubai, UAE, Emirates Airlines still has, I believe, hundreds of millions that the CBN has not yet repatriated to the airline. And every business entity is after making profit. They want to make profit, and if they make the profit, they are not going to use it in Nigeria. They are going to repatriate it to their country. So they know about all these facts. That is why nobody is interested in doing business with us.
Yeah, but do you credit the doggedness of the Tinubu administration for going after this FDI initiatives, because they're surely trying to trigger some sort of inflow of investment towards this country, and they're willing to do it at all cost?
Yeah, I appreciate the shuttle diplomacy being engaged by President Tinubu. Talking about FDI, of course, it's through shuttle diplomacy like the ones he is going to undertake to Qatar that the FDI has chances of getting boosted. But then we need to address it from the basics, like I was trying to explain. You have to make your country really attractive economically, investment-wise, for you to realistically expect foreigners to come into your country and invest. There are fundamental issues to do with security, to do with the way we handle the economy, corruption, so many issues. Power supply has even become a rocket science to us, I'm sure even in your home you've been spending a lot of money powering your generator, for you to have light. And with the temperature changing, hitting around 40 degrees Celsius, one needs at least a fan to be able to sleep.
Why Nigerians, people like Abdullah are pushing for the president to go after get investment, to be brought back to the country? There are experts that are saying that, just like you mentioned, that the country needs to be in better shape, and that way investors would actually just fly like bees and come into the country. So this persistence that the president is given, reaching out to all of this country, do you think it's demeaning the country's value in the eyes of these people? Because we keep seeing them go back and forth. They dangle this, okay, we might consider your agreement with our country, and then later on just backtrack.
Yeah, a kind of pace-saving measure. Really, it is demeaning for a country like Nigeria, the biggest in Africa, like I explained. You know, it's a giant of Africa in terms of population, in terms of economy, in terms of market size. Yet countries have continued to look down on us. You know, the issues, like I tried to explain, have to do with the fundamentals, issues of corruption, issues of, and Tinubu needs to help himself, honestly. President Tinubu, sorry, let me correct myself. He needs to help himself by ensuring that all the people that have toga of corruption serving in his administration are shown the exit door as soon as possible. There are a lot of ministers with very bad reputation that he, a lot of people that he made ministers that have very bad reputation. I don't want to mention names, you know.
And even those that don't are proving it. I mean, we're seeing a lot of accusations and
exactly.
misappropriation coming.
So the countries of the world see all these things and they look down on us. I wish he had continued the way he started, you know, and he really gave a very positive impression when he took over the presidency on May 29 last year. But his appointment of ministers, you know, is so disappointing in terms of the character and personality of a lot of the appointees.
Right. Let's talk about one of the biggest stories of the day, because in 24 hours or so time, we would be experiencing one of two things. Either the NLC goes ahead with the protest or the government succeeds in shutting it down. But the back and forth continues as the NLC mobilizes. We have some of the unions backing out of the nationwide protest. The TUC last week announced that it is not going to go ahead with this one, but the NLC is doubling down, saying, listen, all steam ahead, full steam ahead as far as this protest is concerned. What do you think this signpost, and what do you make of the government's concerns about this nationwide protest?
Okay, let me explain that with a brief story. In 2003, Malam Ibrahim Shekara became the governor of Kano State. A few months later, a private radio station was set up, Freedom Radio, which allowed citizen journalism. You know, citizens were allowed to ventilate their anger through their political programs. For the first time, people didn't have to go to the street to express their anger. They could simply pay a token, go on Freedom Radio and express themselves. So that helped in a great deal in removing Kano from being the most volatile state as it used to be, you know, because of the fact that people can now easily ventilate their anger through a platform provided by a private radio station. For me, government should not shut down or disallow this protest. Let them manage the protest. Of course, the DSS is right to express concern about the fact that it could escalate given the serious tension occasioned by the hardship being experienced by Nigerians. But then, government having known that some unscrupulous individuals can simply you know, use this opportunity, take advantage of it to maybe unleash a kind of mayhem. It can manage it by ensuring the security forces, you know, give them a kind of backing. You know, let the security forces, for example, in the front and the back, let there be police vehicles. What's the name of this organization? Nigeria Security and Civil Defense Corps. And other security organizations can give them a backup to ensure there are unscrupulous elements do not take advantage.
Do you think the government generally worries about the security of the protest, or is more concerned about how it looks politically if Nigerians are protesting?
No, definitely it's more concerned about, you are very right, it's more concerned about the political implication. You see, at a time when this thing started in Mina, there were insinuations, especially in the southwest, that some northerners were up in arms against the Tinubu administration. And then I think it was repeated somewhere in maybe one or two other northern states.
Yeah,
but then
Kano. It was Kano.
Before you know it, Ekiti and other Ibadan also, you know, did the same thing. So government really has every reason to be concerned about the political implication of this thing. Yesterday, I don't know whether it is proper to mention this, but yesterday, you know, a newspaper, Sahara Reporters specifically mentioned about the fact that the alert level has been raised in the Bila because of some activity that is noticed around the military barracks and things like that. I don't want to mention that open support, you know. So you see, what all this means is that government really will not want to be seen in bad light, and this kind of things tend to showcase the government in a very bad light, in a very negative light.
It's looking like right now that you know, the trust between the NLC, the Nigerian people, and the government is severe. I mean, to a point that now the NLC are throwing out their fear, saying that there is that fear that the government might find a way to disrupt the peaceful protests from their angle. And when you look at the government also and the security agencies, there's always that fear that those people, you know, from this peaceful protest, that could be having this disruption plans. So there is also that fear. How do you think, you know, this can be managed?
Yeah, for me, it's better for the government to allow the NLC to go ahead with its protests. That one can easily be managed because at least it's organized at a formal level, rather than allowing people, refusing people to the opportunity to ventilate their anger. You know, if you disallow the people to ventilate their anger under a normal formal process like the one the NLC is proposing, you know, there is a tendency for them to ventilate their anger in an informal way. That is where it has started in some states. And before you know it, it will even get violent because people are really, really, really suffering in Nigeria. The government needs to come to terms with that reality.
No, at this point, I think the government do know, you know, but then Nigerians are already, I would say their perseverance has gotten to the last, you know, tier, and right now they want to react and show them that, okay, we notice you're not listening to us, so let's show you this way. Exactly. But then quickly away from that, let's take a look at the builders seeking alternative as a cement price source. Now, this is not something that we should laugh about, but it's quite funny and it's scary at the same time. I think last year we had a lot of problems of buildings, you know, collapsing, even when cement was at least a more affordable rate, but then the buildings were not even done properly. And then now there is speculations that, okay, there would be another alternative instead of cement, even after the federal government had a sit down with, you know, the producers or manufacturers and sellers of this cement. So do you think this would actually be a good line for, say, Nigeria would start finding alternative, or would it be, you know, us putting ourselves in a dire situation?
Definitely it will put us in a very dire situation, and there are a lot of implications, most of which have to do with the environment and safety as well. Like my brother Mala Abdullah said, you can't stay in a house that cement is not used in its building. You are very right, honestly. There is the issue of safety, there is the issue of environment, a whole lot of other factors. But then there is the bigger issue of the Consumer Protection Council, which probably, as we've been asking it to do, close down a very major retail outlet here in Abuja because of price, the differentials in price. You know, why wouldn't the Nigerian Consumer Protection Council move against Dangote Cement and other cement manufacturers that are making life very, very difficult for Nigerians? Right now, Dangote Cement sells for almost 15,000 per bag, whereas Buai sells at around, I think, 11,000 or 10,000.
I mean, the same Buai that announced a cut to 3,500 naira last year.
You know, he was very sincere, honestly, when they made that announcement. Unfortunately, the competitors reported him to the regulatory authorities, and somehow the regulatory authorities...
Unfair business practice.
Exactly, that it is unfair. But then it is fair to Nigerians, I mean, the Nigerian consumers. So, for me, any cement manufacturer that has refused to play ball should be dealt with by the government. I like what the Minister of Housing also said, that if they don't play ball by way of helping Nigerians, they can simply open the border, even if it is for a limited period, and allow cement to...
I wouldn't threaten, I would just do it, because that's what we need. The Ministry of Information and National Orientation is doubling down to prove that the indicators are showing all green. This infographics is across all the major news dailies this morning, so we might as well just take a look at it as we wrap up. everything is showing that we're on track, but the reality of it is that Nigerians are not feeling any positive about what is going on. What do you make of the indices that the ministry is trying to share?
Well, I appreciate what the Honorable Minister of Information, my big brother, has done by way of this advertorial in major newspapers across the country. But like you tried to explain, it makes very little sense in the sense that it doesn't translate to a better life for Nigerians. Our GDP is still less than, our GDP per capita is still less than $5,000. You know, whereas Qatar, for example, which President Tinubu is visiting on 2nd and 3rd March, has a GDP per capita of $103,000. You see, that is why no matter what efforts the government will make, unless it roots out corruption, it makes the business environment very attractive for foreign investors. It won't translate to a better life for
The scale of the
Nigeria.
problem far outweighs the scale of the solution.
Exactly. So government needs to embrace reality and do the right thing. All these cosmetics measures will not help us.
And as much as we appreciate the government, for trying to sensitize the citizens, printing out all of these details, but we need the actual one. Let's put it that way.
Exactly.
We need the actual one
Exactly.
because Nigerians are definitely not feeling, this enthusiasm that is coming out from the ministry there, and also even from CBN with their own reports.
Exactly.
Well, due to time, of course, we have to wrap up the show here. Thank you so much, Suleiman Obagaya. After the show, you definitely have to pronounce it the right way for me because Abdul cannot. It's coming for me. And of course, with that, we have to wrap up, of course, the show. Thank you so much for staying with us. Please do stick around at the top of the hour. Emmanuel Fashemi would bring you 360 Sport. I am Sumaya Abubakar. Do have a lovely day.
And of course, my name is Abdullah Ahmed. Thank you for your time and company. Daybreak returns tomorrow live at 8. We'll see you then. Good morning.